Hello, my friends. I am Rick, and this is your seat at the table. We are looking at Han Solo in the Corporate Sector Sourcebook. This is one of my favorite ones, and for a number of reasons. When I was a kid, after the initial movies came out and the books that came out with them, there was pretty much nothing new except for the occasional yearly infusion of Star Wars toys and stuff for for Christmas. But in the realms of the stories and the galaxy far, far away, there really wasn't nothing spectacular new for a couple of years. And then came out a series of books, Han Solo's Revenge, Han Solo's Stars at the End, and I'm drawing a blank on the third one, but most of them were adventures from Han and Chewbacca. Oh yeah, there was a series of Lando books as well. Don't get me wrong. And I think one Luke Skywalker, Splinter in the Mind's Eye. All these kind of came out in the late 70s, early 80s. And that was a window and a tidbit more in that galaxy far, far away that as children we grew up with and loved so damn much. This is basically a recap of those three early Star Wars novels, those Han Solo adventures, and they took place in and around the corporate sector, the Tyon hegemony, that kind of stuff, way out in the fringe, far from the core and Coruscant and things like that. And this book really opens that corporate sector area open for play. And this particular book was produced in 1993. And you have your introduction, Han Solo in the corporate sector source book. Yeah, Han Solo at Stars End, released in 79. Han Solo's Revenge, sequel to Stars End, was released later in 79. And the final book in trilogy, The Lost Legacy. Han Solo and the Lost Legacy was released in 80. Same year they brought the Empire Strikes Back. 1980. I was 13-ish. It was just dumb luck. I ran across the first book, Han Solo's Revenge. It was on the bookstore, or Han Solo at Stars End was on a shelf at a convenience store, if I remember right, and I was able to snatch it up, and it was from the back of that book. I was able to order the next two as they came out because I was able to send away for the catalog from the company that was producing them. So, Han and Chewie's exploits in the corporate sector, Han Solo, his stats, an interview with him, Chewbacca and his stats, and an interview with Chewbacca, explaining the blood stripe, and in a condensed nutshell, they come in two categories. There's the yellow and there's the red, and the Corellians do not. These things are a mark of honor, but they're more than that. They're a mark of very distinctive individual. Getting shot at and putting your life on the line in battle is nothing, but purposely doing something you know is going to hurt you in many different levels is what it takes to earn one of these things. It's not something they take lightly. It says, see, anybody can run over to a trench to take out an enemy position. To the Corellians is instinct. It's not anything you can think about. You never get the time. The way the Corellians see it, it takes more than real courage to do something you can contemplate, especially if it's unpleasant to you personally. Now, nobody, or at least very few people, like seeing strangers come to grief, so it's not a big trade-off to help them out. But if you're standing up for what you believe in and you know it's going to hurt, then that's a hero. While other worlds bestow medals and ribbons to award courage, the Corellians, almost always a practical people, prefer a no-nonsense approach over shiny bits of ceramic or cloth. Sure, they've got good citizen prizes, but the important one, the real thing, is a special mark, so others will always know that you can depend on that person. What they do is award something they call the blood stripe. It's a 3-centimeter wide broken stripe of piping sewn into the seam of trousers. You have two classes. Second class is broken gold stripe. First class is a broken red stripe. Pretty difficult to get the second class to begin with, and the first class is usually posthumous. As I said, isn't for flashy things, so you can't automatically assume that anyone wearing a galactic is a galactic hero or something. Of course, warfare is just about the hardest thing you can do, so 999 out of 1,000 are courage under fire. You wear as much as you choose, as often as you like, but it's a commitment. It says, I stand for something, a code, a belief system, something, and I honor my debts. History 2 of the corporate sector. Era of the Republic. Allies of Palatine, the corporate sector charter, voting sponsors, contributing sponsors, list of corporations and stuff that signed up in the initial days and then the following days. Okay. This, chapter 3 is the corporate sector itself. Corporate sector authority. Corporate sector authorities are generally owned by a number of corporations. The authority can be quite independent. The authority is run by direct boards, which is composed of executives from outside controlling companies. However, their only concern is simple: profit. Executive directs board, break down various departments and so on and so forth within the corporate sector. Office of the XO, temporary consulting committees, break down these various ones. Vice president level, entertainment, public relations, recruitment, research, scout services, security, corporations, consumers, and the CSA. The corporate sector authority has absolute authority over the sector, does not exert absolute control. The CSA has encouraged private citizens and small companies to set up businesses in the sector. The authority acknowledges that it cannot be everywhere and do everything. The authority does lease some systems out to other companies, typically sponsors, etc. Living and working conditions. Despite local particularities, life in the sector is quite similar to life in other sections of the empire. People work, eat, sleep, relax. The difference is the pace of the corporate sector. Many visitors have a hard time adjusting to the frantic pace of life in the corporate sector. Said they never sleep there, and in a way that's true. The sector facilities 3 rotating shifts keep operating 24 hours a day, 368 days a year by the imperial calendar. Even holidays don't count for much. This is not to suggest people don't get time off. Life is hard for the common workers. They need time off to consume the goods. There is simply a surplus of labor in the authority, and factories and processing plants almost always run at full capacity. The authority has more than enough people to run things thus at this breakneck speed of production. Last distinctions: consumerism in the corporate sector. Corporate sector is more about just mining, farming, and processing. It's about selling. That material and product exchange program of theirs is one sweet deal, let me tell you. They do all the hard work. Well, actually, they have underpaid cred drones do all the hard work and pass on the goods and resources on to sponsor firms and regular companies at a higher cost, of course, who then turn it out into a billion different goodies for you to buy. To say the corporate sector is wealthy is like saying space is empty. Sure, it's accurate, but it's more than that. The wealth expresses itself in a number of ways. You have a wider range of products, everything from speeders to comlinks. It'll give you the impression that the sector is only one place you'll find any of this stuff. It's a big galaxy. If you look hard enough and are patient, there's lots of products to be found. It's just most planets don't have access to all these goods, especially these days with so much cargo taken up by war material, etc., etc. Chapter 4, Security Division. First thing to keep in mind when you're in the corporate sector is that the Espos have different priorities than the bully boys in the Empire proper. In the Empire, no matter how you look at it, it's all a political thing. Maintain a new order, keep discipline. See, the Empire wants to run every little person's part of the pie. Corporate sector only wants to make a mint. They're doing a mighty damn fine job of it. Espo forces do a lot of the same types of things ISB and the correct do, but for different reasons. They don't care what you think or what you believe or who you worship. They just want you to work your tail off for the company. As long as you pay your tariffs and fees, you'll never get any grief, which can be comforting. They'll get your back in other ways, though. They spend lots of credits on keeping things that way. Formation, policies. Think about it. The corporate sector authority, their security division. Stormtroopers are there to enforce the will of the Emperor and by fiat, whoever he's got in command and control or in charge. Corporate sector authority Espos, as they call them, the Espos, are there to protect the property of the corporate sector enforced the tax laws and the rules to make sure you're not being a problem and you're not disrupting the status quo. If you go along with the plan, you pay your dues, and you don't cause a bunch of problems, they'll leave you alone. Usually anyway. They don't go out of their way to push some ideal on you as a citizen or as a visitor. F up, and they'll make it their living duty to put you back in your place permanently, dead if necessary. And they're not apologetic about it and doing it either. So they got locational enforcement, situational enforcement, ground forces, the authority legal codes, typical SFO trooper. Yeah. Typically, an SFO squad will resort to more excessive force than other police forces. Only Imperial Stormtroopers are likely to use heavy weapons. Most of the SFO heavy weapons are anti-personnel and therefore can be used with impunity around delicate structures. The average SFO troop is quite a different person from his or her Imperial counterpart. SFOs aren't motivated by loyalty or tale to glory. They're simply making a wage. In addition to that, understandably, SFOs are much likely to surrender should the odds turn against them, but they're also much easier to bribe, provided bribery is discreet. Getting caught by detached duty is a constant fear. Just saying, right? Stormtroopers, these fine folks, are not. You have to excuse me, but I'm trying to get used to a set of dentures. That plays havoc on me sometimes. Okay, the picket the fleet. If the ground forces are pretty cracked, they're really good, they're well trained, well equipped, probably over equipped, over enthusiastic and pursuant of their position, and they're well paid. The opposite can be said about the picket fleet. The corporate sector's Navy, somehow or another, they got it in their head that the Empire would take care of that sort of thing. And it didn't really pan out that way, as the Empire usually approaches the corporate authority with a hands off. As long as the credits keep pouring into the Palatine's coffers, they left the corporate sector more or less to its own devices. The picket fleet was kind of this afterthought. So they acquired on the cheap really, really old and decrepit warships from eras before the Clone Wars and from the Clone Wars. And they're inefficient, they're slow, sometimes undergunned for what they do, they're not well supported, there's not a lot of them, and they don't have a lot of experience in operating in fleet tactics. And traditionally, they hire admirals and commanding officers that are retiring from the Imperial Navy or cast out by the Imperial Navy, and it has some detrimental effects. The other thing about them is to think about their primary role is anti-piracy, tariff control, so customs, things like this. Actually dealing with any kind of large combat scale issues, they really don't do that well because there's not a lot of it. You're not going to see too many really large pirate fleets operating inside a corporate sector authority space because that would definitely draw attention from the Imperial Navy, but still, right? As a operative and an independent-minded trader, i.e., smuggler, these fellows can be a bit of a challenge, but they are not the Imperial Navy. Just saying, they're not. So we got Chapter 5, Stars End, and this is dedicated to, because of the book, the novel, Han Solo Stars End. This is a super secret, super max detention center that Chewbacca ends up getting stuck in, and Han has to rescue him from it. And to make a long story short, they literally blow the top off of it and have a blast. And then we got Stars End, a model penal facility in a dangerous galaxy. No one can afford to settle for less than the best. And then written down here is, I must strongly protest this blatant disregard for all security precautions that we have taken. This is a prison, not a luxury resort. Whoever wrote this pamphlet is completely unqualified for this job. Vice Prex M. Herkin, Corporate Sector Security Division, Corporate Sector Authority. Right? So you get a nice little overview of Stars End. Nice little place to put your enemies away at. Chapter 6, Authority Executives and Operatives. So you get the various NPC or non-player characters that can be found operating that came out of the novels and their history and stories and so on and so forth. It gives you a splattering of indications of types of people you can use to populate the sector authority for any kind of adventures. And once again, Chapter 7, personalities of the sector. These would be the non-authority employed NPCs of note, people that Han Solo and Chewbacca had encounters with. Former friends and associates and new friends and associates and so on and so forth. Chapter 8, the Fringe. System for system, you have more credits coming out of the corporate sector than any other region in the galaxy. Where you have that much money, you'll get someone trying to cut himself a slice without paying their dues. Same as anywhere else, you're going to have the invisible markets and shadow economies. The corporate sector would like to put them all out of business. They do a fairly effective job, all things considered. They don't have the kind of firepower the Empire can throw at nuisances. But they do have weapon scanners, ident checks, and who knows what else. That's something to keep in mind. If you're running a campaign in the corporate sector and your player characters visit one of the top planets or secure planets or heavily populated planets, running around with blasters and heavy weapons is not going to happen. You're going to get shut down fast because they have sensors and roadblocks and checkpoints everywhere. It's just, that's how tight it is. You have to be more slick about how you operate within the larger locations. Out on the sticks is that's a different story, but you go visit a major spaceport, leave your weapons in the ship. Find something that qualifies as a tool and isn't quite as effectively blatantly noticeable. Just so you know. Outlaw techs, smugglers. So outlaw techs, if you're a smuggler or an honest independent individual with a nice starship that needs some modifications or perhaps some repairs, and you don't really have the credits and or you really don't feel comfortable showing up at a major repair shop in a starport, because obviously it's going to be monitored by the corporate sector authority, you might want to seek out some people who do stuff on the side, and that's where the outlaw techs come into play. They run under black market repair and modification facilities in various places. Ironically, some of these can actually be located within these very big, heavily populated starport centers as well. There's another book, OMSI's incredible starport guide and things like that talk a bit about that, but this is an example of that. Smugglers, slavers, crime lords, Chapters 9, starships, capital ships. Even as section is controlled as a corporate sector, large capital combat starships are required to enforce the peace and control smugglers and pirates. However, when corporate sector first chartered, there wasn't much serious thought about providing any substantial sector navy. It was thought that pirate and rebel activity in the region would be minimal. The authority centered its naval plans on patrol ships with advanced scanners. Almost as an afterthought, the authority built a few carriers for IRD fighters. What the authority didn't take into account was the fabulous lure of its wealth would have. Without the comforting power of imperial cruisers and destroyers, the corporate sector had its work cut out for it. The authority had slowly realigned its priorities and is allocating more funding for design and purchase of adequate capital ships. For the time being, however, roughly 2/3 of the Picket fleet has been assigned to patrolling major trade routes, leaving most of the corporate sector space poorly defended. And we're using old Victory-class Star Destroyers and invincible heavy cruisers. Prevailing wisdom, as old merchants say and goes, is not wise, just popular and fickle. This truth applies directly to the ancient invincible class dreadnought heavy cruiser. These mammoth ships were first designed over 3,000 years ago under their inspiration on the Titanic battle cruisers from eras like Zim the Despot and the Alaskan conflicts. At that time, it was one of the largest battle cruisers of the old Republic fleet. So, think about that for a minute. That literally shows you that in the Star Wars galaxy that there can be ships that are thousands of years old and still in use. Some of these battle cruisers that the Corporate Sector's Picket Fleet uses were built thousands of years ago and have seen countless upgrades and modifications and repairs and reversions, but the core, the frameworks, perhaps even some of the critical systems are thousands of years old. Right? We're out of Corvettes, space transports. Of course, we got the Millennium Falcon included in here. Rin Assad's bulk haulers, the Eddie lighters, a cruise liner, Trinity patrol ship, gigs, which are basically a different form of, let's just say, armed shuttles. They don't. They have the performance of low-end fighters, but they really, it's like pennants. Pennants are ship's boats, and they can be armed and fast. And when but X-wings are not. Starfighters, the Authorities, IRD, the Intercept Reconnaissance Defense Fighter, the typical all-around fighter. This is the corporate's answer to the TIE Fighter, and it has shielding. C-95 Headhunters. Chapter 10 vehicles, getting around the corporate sector. Work vehicles, you got your grab sleds and cargo lifters and luxury vehicles, some various cutaways there, and aerospace transports, other vehicles, Expo vehicles, patrol ground cruisers, Expo Walker, patrol skimmer, hover vans, mobile detention wagons, strikebreaker riot control vehicles. Chapter 11, equipment, anti-concussion fields, molecularly bonded armor, drop shafts, status boots, riot shields, stun batons, Expo armor, etc., heavy weapons. All right, nice little collection there. Miscellaneous equipment, ship decking kit, snooper goggles, director unit, quick draw holsters, armored spacesuits. Chapter 12 is droids. We got bullocks. One of the, in Blue Max, this was a combo that it was through several of the adventures with Han and Chewie. And servant droids, freight droids, agrobots, robo haulers, robo bartender, robo hack, basically a robotic cab. Combat and security droids, gladiator droids. Chapter 13, various aliens that you can encounter that technically are not indigenous intelligent life forms, because one of the things about the corporate sector of charter was it was supposed to be an area of space that was devoid of any intelligent advanced life, so that the planets could be exploited. That was part of the deal. And the truth is that over time they've explored and they pushed the boundaries out, and the corporate sector has grown, and they have incorporated a number of systems that they have not classified the indigenous inhabitants as being intelligent, despite the fact that they are. That's how they bend the rule, get around it, right? Plus all kinds of others, because the corporate sector is a magnet. Anybody wanting to make money or find a way to get advancement, that kind of stuff, tend to migrate to the corporate sector at least once in their careers. So this brings in a collage of beings from everywhere in the galaxy. Then we got chapter 14, various creatures, and we get to the end of the book. So this, like I said, Corporate Sector Authority Sourcebook. This is a great book, an A1 read. If you get your hands on one of these things, I mean, it's really worth it. And I don't know that any of the later incarnations of the Star Wars game systems since, Western Games obviously is defunct. If anybody's reintroduced this book or an equivalent to it, I'd like to know about it. I mean, I really would. Because if they haven't, they're missing out on something. This is definitely a very Star Wars oriented, really rich environment for many hours of role-playing game fun. Just saying. Till next time, this is Rick, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.